In this class we want to talk about types of organization and their associated structures. So we start with, what is an organization structure? Well, an organization structure is, first of all, an intangible web of relationships between people. People work within organizations, and their position within the organization defines its structure. For example, we have line managers who are responsible for the day-to-day operations of the business, ensuring that production schedules are met and that a routine, an efficient routine, is implemented. We may have above those departmental managers, and above the departmental managers we may have divisional managers, or we may have directors. So it's the relationship between the people that defines the organization. That's one way of looking at it. It's their shared purposes and the task they set themselves to achieve these purposes. It's the way they go about achieving the purposes. It's their role within the organization and how they implement their role. The workers produce. The line managers are responsible to ensure that the workers have everything they need to produce, and that production occurs according to the schedule and occurs efficiently. The departmental managers ensure that the line managers have all that they require to do the job, and so on. So out of the relationships between people we get an insight into the structure of the organization. Right. The purpose of organization is to achieve an effective balance between, on the one hand, the division of tasks and responsibilities, and on the other hand, the need to coordinate individual efforts and roles. And it's the purpose of the structure to balance these. There is a division of labour, as economists say, within businesses. People do specific functions and they become adept or skillful at performing those functions. They therefore become more efficient. And the division of labour, or as we call it here, the division of task, this defines to some extent the structure, because it's the way that the work is broken up determines the structure. And the way the work is broken up is determined by the division of labour. What is it that the workers can do most efficiently in conjunction with the capital? And then there is the need to coordinate the individual efforts and roles. Management must coordinate to make sure that there is an efficiency overall within the organization, to make sure that all the individual components are brought together to make sure that the final outcome meets the production targets and schedules and attributes, the quality of the product, the delivery date, so that the marketing personnel may present to the customer a product that meets the customer's needs. The understanding of an organization may be based on unwritten evidence and informal arrangements. So, observing the organization and how it works in practice may be a better indicator than by looking at what they write on paper about the organization, because organizations are not, generally speaking, fixed in time. They evolve over time, and it's not always the case that the paperwork that describes the organization is kept contemporary or is kept up to date with those changes. So observations may be a better approach to trying to understand the nature of the organization. The organization structure is the way in which the organization members are constrained and controlled by the organization. So there is a group of people, and they are allocated to functions according to their skills and abilities and their propensities, what they want to do. And within those roles they must be coordinated, and the structure facilitates that coordination. An appropriate structure must be found to ensure that all the members of the organization are contributing towards the final product, because it's the final product that will be sold on the market which will generate the revenue that will pay salaries and profits and returns on investment and so on. The structure is also the way in which the distribution of activities and responsibilities and the organizational procedures and regulations are determined. Now this is all based on the Open University, but it's the distribution of activities and responsibilities that also determine the organization. Now I've talked about that on the previous slide, so I won't labour the point. But for the moment, it's looking at the organization from, if you like, a social perspective. It's looking at the people, their roles, their responsibilities, and the coordination of the people within the organization that determines the structure. Organizational structures vary according to the goals and objectives of the business, and also the culture in which the business operates. So the goals and objectives of the business determine the structure, whether it's highly capitalized, while it is perhaps it is more people orientated, the way it sets up its plant, its production facilities, the way it sets out its overall objectives. So the structure is determined by what the management think is best. But also it depends on the culture of the organization. And by culture here, I don't mean the wider societal culture, I mean the culture of the business. Because some businesses which have been running for many years have developed their own practices, their own way of doing things, which may be seen as their culture. A structure in an organization allows it to allocate responsibilities and activities and to process. And this means it's able to define what it is, what it wants in terms of the product and how the product should be generated, the people who will be involved in the production of the product, which in a small business may be everybody. So it's how those people are then organized that determines the structure. A well-planned structure will determine an organization's success. The aim of a structure is to increase efficiency and profitability. So out of all the possible structures that may be imagined, perhaps only some will be efficient in the context of the product and the skills of the management and the requirements of the market in terms of the volume of production and so on. So of all the possible structures, perhaps only some will see the light of day, and of those only one will be selected. An organizational structure indicates how tasks in an organization are divided up and coordinated through the workforce. I've already, as I said, laboured that one, so we won't dwell on it too much. There are two requirements that establish a structure. Developing individual tasks through the division of labour, which then leads to specialisation. Now, I've mentioned this earlier, but the idea of specialisation is that workers become skilled in doing a particular task. Because they become skilled, they become more efficient, their productivity is higher. And it's finding personnel, finding workers whose aptitudes marry up with the requirements of production. That is the problem for management. But having found those, and then allocated people to specific tasks, and allowing them to develop the skills to produce the product, then the structure is defined accordingly. The coordination of the tasks and activities allow the organisation to achieve its full potential. So coordinating all the tasks and the activities brings about efficiency. And all of this is assuming, of course, that the management are capable of coordination, and hopefully that their particular expertise within the organisation is their ability to coordinate and to ensure overall efficiency of the organisation. Let's talk some more about coordination, and let's break it up into a series of small diagrams. So we'll talk about coordination. The first thing we could talk about is informal communications. Well, within coordination there are informal communications. Workers feed back their opinions about the process, about how it's done, and ways perhaps to improve the task, or issues associated with the task which perhaps haven't been anticipated at the time it was set up. So there is a form of information sharing and the communication of best practice. There may be team coordination and communication. Teams come together to coordinate small sections perhaps, and to talk about production within a small section. But they communicate and perhaps come up with ideas. And the fact that they are working on smaller tasks, they will have expert knowledge of that task. So it is always worth getting the workers' feedback on how the product is being produced at that level. And there is also a media richness, which means that the workers are or should be encouraged to feed back. The workers should be encouraged to get involved with the organisation and the development of the product, the development of the tasks, and the overall design of the production facility, because their feedback is crucial. We've also got, within coordination, we've got standardization. Formal structures given clear goals and outputs explained. Now by that I mean clear goals and outputs must be explained. They're formal structures, let's say, or formal instructions within formal structures, and goals and objectives should be set out clearly for the workers to understand. This is a form of standardization. In other words, this is the way it's done. Now, in some areas, this is quite understandable. For example, in the area of health and safety, then certain clothing must be worn in certain situations, and hard hats must be worn on the site, and so on. So that would be formal and standardized. But perhaps the standardization can only be carried to a certain level, because after that the particular requirements of the task means that perhaps the workers have a greater expertise than what was anticipated at the start. So using formal instructions and creating standardized approaches may be necessary in some contexts and desirable, but there should also be room for the informal, as mentioned above. Standardization may also require considerable amounts of training for the workers to ensure that they are prepared adequately to perform the tasks. Now the formal hierarchy. Well, large firms tend to adopt this type of coordination. Formal hierarchies require constant supervision and supervision at all levels. It's formal. There are set rules, set procedures, and the outcomes are measured by the ability of the management to follow those set procedures and deliver the output. It's formalized. It could be written down, it could be in manuals, it could be in instruction books. It's a costly and slow process. So we have different approaches here to organizations, and this idea of coordination, well, informal, which tends to be more flexible, more involving participation on the part of the workers and the management. There's that one. There's a standardized one, looking at areas where the work can be standardized, and if it can be standardized, perhaps that's the right way to go. In some areas, standardization is necessary, in the case of health and safety, as I mentioned. But the formal one, that's almost based on mistrust of everyone. It's a set of procedures all the way down. But in some activities, in some industries, that may be essential, particularly if they're making dangerous products or products which require a great deal of security. It depends on the product. It depends on the nature. But formal tends to be costly and slow. That's the point. Okay, that's our brief introduction to structures. There are subsequent follow-up classes on this one, so please look at those as well. In the meantime, we'll conclude this class, and thank you for watching.